Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts, on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. Today, we are going to be discussing USAP. Alright, this here is a university strategic alignment process, or plan I should say, that was actually kind of part of IPFW's recent movement towards restructuring what the university is and what it does. People are a little concerned about this and the directions that they're planning to head with it. I just went to a meeting 2 days ago now. I was actually at the Tecumseh Library here in town, and at that meeting there was a history professor by the name of Dr. Mallinson, who did a very nice job of trying to explain and break down this whole report or this whole plan that IPFW is trying to implement. And this kind of ties in with another thing that's going on as far as IPFW considering breaking up or getting a divorce, so to speak. And just so you have some background, IPFW is a university that's kind of unique, at least as far as here in this state, just because it's really supposed to be a joint venture between Indiana University and Purdue University. So that's what IPFW stands for, is Indiana Purdue University Fort Wayne. But it seems that they're having some issues lately, and there's been some upheaval related to that. I think that some of it is resulting in some friction between the universities, and maybe IU feeling like it's not being included in decision making as much as it should, or maybe it's not being able to influence the courses offered as much as they would like to. So we're seeing some potential for reworking how IPFW works even. At the college level, as far as what college is responsible for what, and that's a huge change. That's a whole lot to try to work through and process. So the big questions are: hey, do we end up splitting this one university into Indiana University Fort Wayne and Purdue University Fort Wayne, and just kind of split them right down the middle? Just divide everything up, or do we split things up a little disproportionately, and have majority of the campus just turn over to Purdue's hands, since they're really the predominant factor in most of this anyway. Just kind of have IU relinquish IPFW, most of IPFW campus, to Purdue, and then have IU retain their medical center, which is basically at the edge of campus, actually, and really just kind of focus on their medical programs and graduate programs from there. So there's a bit that's kind of up in the air as far as that's concerned, and it's kind of tying into this whole USAP thing, all right? And like I said, this USAP really stands for a strategic alignment process. And so it kind of stems from IPFW having some issues monetarily speaking. And part of that really stems from the fact that they're seeing enrollment rates, I'm not sure if it's actually declining, but it seems to be kind of tapering off and plateauing at the very least. So with that lack of growth, it's hard to justify further growth in the university. And so they're starting to think of ways to try to maybe tidy up some things, make some things more efficient. I'm almost reminded of a scene from one of my favorite movies, Office Space, where we have these efficiency consultants come in to Initech and start downsizing the workplace to try to make things run a little more efficiently. And I kind of imagine the same kind of thing happening here at IPFW, to where they're having some people come in. I mean, luckily enough, this whole thing is run by a board of 24 people, 12 faculty and 12 staff. They're putting together this whole USAP report and planning out this process. So that's great that they're pulling from the current materials that they have available to them. But it's still kind of a stretch to have 24 people decide what to do with an entire university, right? Especially when you consider 12 staff members and 12 faculty members. I mean, you're going to be thinking about, oh, well, there are only going to be so many departments and programs represented in that sample. You know, it's kind of hard to get a faculty member from each one of the 100 different programs that IPFW offers if you're only pulling 12 faculty members. It's kind of hard to do that. So from that perspective, you start to realize, well, this may not necessarily be the most unbiased way to go about it. Just because not all the departments, not all the programs are represented on the staff for this USAP council, so to speak. So that's right off the bat, that's kind of a concern. Especially when you throw around words like restructuring or downsizing or things like that really start to scare people, because that not only jeopardizes the lives of the staff members and the faculty members in those departments and programs, but obviously it also affects the students, right? So those students that want to go into those types of programs, they are going to have some issues, because then their program won't exist by the time they get there. So it starts creating a lot of problems and a lot of concerns for a number of people when you start throwing around some of these words. And so it was great to get to go to this meeting here at the library just down the street from where I live, and hear all of what this history professor had to say about this process, because he really did go into a lot of detail. Kind of starting out with, like I said, universities trying to clean up its act. That's really the main goal here, and you know what? That's a goal that anyone can respect. And it kind of stems from this problem that I guess past couple years, IPFW's budget has been in deficit every year, and it's been in deficit by a couple $1 million. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And I absolutely agree that hints that maybe we need to start doing some house cleaning and making things a little more efficient, maybe trying to generate some more income streams. I'm completely with you, man, all the way. It's just we really have to take a close look at how we're going to make those decisions. And we can look at things like they suggested maybe investing in some sorts of ways that would actually generate income over the long term. I agree with that. Sounds great. Then they were starting to think, well, maybe there's some ways that we can make the campus run a little more efficiently. And that's where we start to see some of that concern come into play. Now obviously some of it seems pretty innocuous on the surface. Just to kind of take a look here. Let me see, they were thinking of consolidating some departments, I think, in this USAP report. Economics and the Master of Business Administration, they're considering trying to consolidate into other programs, other departments maybe, things of that nature. But the part that really kind of got on some people's nerves, I guess, is when they mention the word restructuring. Because when you say restructure, sure, you can mean consolidation. You can mean reorganization. But a lot of people are concerned that what restructure actually means is laying off or completely tossing out certain departments, certain programs. And that's where we start to really run into some legitimate concerns. So some of the restructure proposal some of the programs included in this restructure proposal include anthropology, geosciences, history, international language and culture studies, philosophy, physics, political science, sociology, and women's studies. So a number of different things. But if you notice kind of a pattern there, there's a predominantly liberal arts kinds of degrees. And more often than not, when you're just talking about people and maybe the utility of some of these degrees, I admit myself, I've made fun of one of my good friends from out in Colorado. When I was out there getting my master's, he was getting his history teaching license, and I was kind of making fun of him because I'm like, all right, so you're a history major, but you're going into it for teaching, so at least you have an excuse. Because the rest of the history majors, I'm not sure what they're going to do or what they're planning on doing. And I know that's terrible. Terrible person for thinking that way, but honestly, I'm not the only one. Okay, a lot of other people kind of take this kind of stance that, well, getting these degrees is almost a joke if you're not planning on teaching it, right? And there may be some truth to that, but there are certainly a number of different jobs that you can get that you can benefit from a background in history or women's studies, anthropology. These things can play significantly into a job and really help you get a position and give you a unique perspective, a unique background that can really enable you to thrive and survive in that particular position. And especially when we toss in this notion, actually the history professor who gave this USAP presentation, he brought this up as well. But it's really nice to see these liberal arts degrees make a person very flexible. Because in today's modern job landscape, people typically aren't just getting out of college, graduating with that degree, that bachelor's degree, and then immediately getting a job in their field and staying with that job through retirement. We're not really seeing that. That's almost an archaic way of approaching jobs and careers nowadays. Okay, there aren't many people that end up going through that whole process in that kind of way. Normally, they'll hold a job for 1 or 2 years, and then they'll end up moving or changing jobs, and sometimes even changing career paths. Or they'll graduate with their 4-year degree, and they'll end up getting a job that has nothing to do with their degree. And then maybe somewhere longer, down the line, they'll get a job finally that has to do with their degree. Or they're going to school and working at the same time. They graduate from school and they just revert to going to work full time at the job that they were already at, which had nothing to do with their degree. Or maybe it did in some cases. So there's all sorts of different options as far as seeing where people might go with all these different options available to them. And so it's not always going to be your job is going to be tailored to your degree. So if you have some of these more liberal arts degrees that give you a lot of flexibility, a lot of background and training in more broad topics, that can really help you actually in getting a number of different jobs just based on the availability of the job that you want to get. And that happens. That's okay. Nothing wrong with it. But the question that a lot of people are asking is, why are these particular departments, or not departments, but programs within a variety of departments, why are these programs being put on this table which is kind of labeled restructure. All right, because once again, they're concerned that these programs might be eliminated, or otherwise kind of pieced apart and maybe speckled into other programs. Because obviously, once again, that affects a number of people's jobs, and it affects kinds of majors that students want to get. Because I'm sorry, when I came out of high school, I was told that there was only one place in the entire state of Indiana that had a zoology degree. And so what I do? I went to that one place that had a zoology major. Because I wasn't going to waste my time on a university that didn't have a program that I wanted to do. I'm not going to waste my time and money there. I'm going to go to a place that knows how to specialize in what I want to specialize in. And yeah, people may, shut down and make fun of IPFW for a number of reasons. But the honest truth of it is that IPFW is pretty much the best place to be in the second largest city in Indiana. It is. It has the best of both worlds. It has great stuff from IU, it has great stuff from Purdue, and boom, it's all in one location, covers Northeast Indiana beautifully. Beautifully. In every other part of the state, we have their own little universities that specialize in everyone in those regions. But as far as up here, you have IPFW. That is great. That is awesome. So to take the best thing in the second largest city and try to, I want to say distill it and get rid of number of programs just seems like a horrible idea. I mean, I understand that the economy or that the job situation or whatever is kind of dictating that we start downsizing, but I don't believe that that's the way to do it. I would think that there's a way that we can kind of work in some other finaglings to maintain all these programs. Now, another thing that kind of comes to the table is, how were these the programs that were slated for restructure in the first place? How is that? Why is that? And part of it comes to looking at the representation of these programs on the committee that was making these decisions. Because honestly, if you look at the breakdown, there were fewer liberal arts people on the committee than there were from any other place, any other department or school, so to speak. So the School of Liberal Arts was not well represented on this committee. So it's kind of not surprising to see a lot of these restructure proposals to be in the direction of liberal arts. Not the most fair, not the most unbiased. But this report does try to draw upon some data, okay, to make these assertions, to make it appear as though it was unbiased. Okay, so it tries to mention that it tried to look at the number of graduates from all these different programs and sit here and say, well, if programs aren't graduating more than 16 people, per semester, per year, I forget how they calculated it, but something like, if they're not doing graduating more than 16 students every year, semester, whatever, then they should be considered for restructure. And so these were basically the departments that were selected for that purpose. Now, what's interesting is that, sure, if you look at some of these programs, most of these are small programs, okay? And what surprised me, honestly, was seeing physics on the restructure list. And I can understand that. Physics being a smaller program. What I don't understand entirely is why you would want to cut that or fold it into something else, because physics is really its own thing. That is a huge, huge field that really can't be packed in with anything else. Unless you want to reduce physics down to just Physics 101 and maybe 102 for all the Gen Ed students. Physics is really just so vast. It's hard to try to incorporate that in any other way other than it being its own program. It's hard to do that. And especially when you have, the upsurge in world-renowned physicists, astrophysicists in particular, who are going around and talking and on all these discovery shows and things. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, people like that. These guys are great. And to think that the second best place in the state, second biggest place in the state to go to school, we don't have that option, or we won't have that option, that's kind of a slap in the face, I think. So that's really concerning. And it's also kind of contradictory to what we were originally thinking when I first saw this report. When I first saw this report, I saw a bunch of those liberal arts degrees. I'm like, wow, this is really kind of tailoring towards, maybe some of the STEM fields, more tailored towards engineering and nursing. But then you have physics, and you're like, well, wait a minute. Physics is a huge component in engineering and technology. Why is that on the chopping block? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I started thinking, well, I actually went to a research day here on IPFW campus a couple months ago and talked with the physics people, the graduate students, the professors, whatever, and got to see some of the research that they're doing, as far as some of the robotics stuff that they're doing, some of the AI stuff that they're doing. Is just incredible. It's groundbreaking stuff. It's awesome. I was even joking with some friends a few months ago about, hey, maybe the epicenter, the headquarters for Skynet is going to be right here in Fort Wayne, right? So from the Terminator movies, the massive AI that tries to take over and kill all humans, yeah, maybe that will be here in Fort Wayne. That'd be kind of cool. Be the epicenter of all that devastation. But it's just it's sad to go from that extreme to being so excited about our physics program here at IPFW to being faced with this report and being like, oh my gosh, they want to cut that, or they're thinking about cutting that. That is just, my heart just sinks in my chest. I'm just like, wow, how is that possible? I almost feel like these people that are doing this report, it's really aggravating to me to see some of the most groundbreaking stuff just being put on the chopping block and maybe dissolved to where it will never go anywhere. And that knowledge will just be lost. Now obviously not all of it, but certainly a bit of that skill and a bit of that knowledge will be lost in that process if the physics department was to be dissolved. So that's concerning to me. That's concerning to a number of other people. The other thing that's kind of interesting is looking at some of the other data that they were looking at in this report that they were trying to use to justify their decisions to restructure certain programs. Now, once again, we looked at a number of graduates, okay, but we also need to consider the monetary factor, right? So how much money gets funneled into these programs and how much money comes out of them. And what's interesting is really with that whole situation, it really becomes very, very complex, because then you have to consider how many grants are coming in from all the research that's going on in all these departments. You think about anthropology, you think about geosciences, you think about physics. I mean, you're talking about some hardcore research funds going into those programs in order to do that kind of research. And so you have to think about, well, the university should be actually generating income from most of these departments. You know, at the end of the day, when you total everything up, these different departments should have a positive balance. So why would we want to cut them? Because they're actually helping buffer the deficit, so to speak. And so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I guess some other people have sat down and tried to calculate the savings, the total savings from cutting all these different programs. And we've heard numbers around $80,000, maybe to as much as $200,000. Once again, per year, per semester, I can't remember off the top of my head. I would just assume per academic year tends to be the general metric that they use. So, okay, we can save up to $200,000 per academic year. All right, that's progress. However, when we consider that we are $2 or $3 million in deficit every academic year, 200,000 is a drop in the bucket. Okay, that's like maybe 10% of the total deficit. So not really, probably not the direction that we need to be looking, actually. Maybe we should look other places. So that's kind of where we stand as far as the general premise of everything. Is trying to tease out some of these numbers, see where they got these numbers, why they got these numbers, and try to understand why they're making these decisions, or at least proposing to make these decisions. Because once again, if you're just looking at money, generally money is calculated at the department level. And so once we kind of start teasing things out, we find, oh yeah, they were only looking at the department level for everything. Whether we talk about graduates, whether we talk about money, we're talking about department level stuff, department level data. And so it's hard to piece out what each program is doing if we're only looking at the departments. That seems like it requires some hedging, which isn't really warranted, or even you can't really do it because you don't have the data to do that. That's just crazy to me. So it really does seem like there's some picking and choosing going on here that's not necessarily backed up by data. You know, it seems like there's somebody going in here, looking at the broad spectrum numbers, you know, how many graduates, how much money, and sitting here and being like, well, I bet it's because of this program. I bet it's because of that program. And so you know what? Just based on my intuition, we're going to select these programs for restructure. And that blows my mind. I can't imagine how that makes any sense to anyone. You know, especially when you consider some of these advanced complex factors like, well, okay, you want to say only, let's just take it for instance here, let's say only 6 people graduate from the physics program every year. Okay, let's just say for instance. So 6 people, but, you know, and that sounds terrible. You're like, oh my gosh, only 6 people? That sounds like a waste of time and effort. Why are we even bothering with the physics program? Okay, let's sit here and think about this. There were 10 people that went into the physics program, and 6 of them graduated. That's actually not half bad. 60% rate? That's actually not half bad. You know, and let's take another for instance here. Maybe scale things up a bit. Let's take let's say nursing. Okay. And we see that we have 100 nursing students, and only 30 of them graduate the nursing program. that is 30 is a lot higher of a number than 6. No doubts there. Okay. 30 is 5 times greater of a number than 6. It really is. So yes, we should be devoting more resources towards nursing than towards physics. Just overall perspective there. But when we look at the percentages, that means that only 30% of nursing students graduated. Whereas when we looked at the physics students, 60% of them graduated. And that starts making you wonder, okay, so nursing program isn't very good at graduating students, but the physics program is good at graduating students. Okay, cool. So I would say that the physics program is more effective than the nursing program. But because we have so many more students going through the nursing program, we need, overall, more money going to the nursing program. Obviously. But I wouldn't say that the physics program is a failure and that it's in need of restructure, because clearly it's effective. Percentage-wise, it's more effective, it's twice as effective as the nursing program is. And so, the other layer to this whole USAP thing is that they're looking at physics and they're being like, well, we need to cut that. 6 people, we can't do it. Just get rid of it. Maybe. Maybe that's what they're saying there. But at least restructure it. Then they're looking over here at nursing and they're going, hey, there's only 30% graduating. How can we get the other, how can we get a greater percentage of them to graduate? Well, let's throw more money at the program. You back up for a minute and you look and you're like, okay, so you want to drop physics, which is automatically better at graduating students, and you want to give nursing even more money to help make it more effective at graduating students. You start wondering where the logic is there in that. You're like, okay. I thought we were trying to make things more efficient. Because if we're trying to make things more efficient, I would assume you would want to keep the more efficient programs and then maybe consider some new strategies for dealing with the less efficient programs. I would think that would be a better way to approach this whole situation. I don't know. I'm just a lowly professor at a community college. What do I know? I don't know. But it was very interesting sitting in there in that meeting at the library and hearing this history professor talk about all these different nuances, because there are so many different layers that need to be considered, so many complexities to this whole problem. It was great having a number of professors from IPFW there as well. I mean, history department was on the restructure list. Women's studies, we had one of those professors there. We had a geosciences professor there. We had an anthropology professor there. Another professor. We had at least five different IPFW professors there at that meeting. All from the departments that want to be, or they're on the block to be restructured. So those 5 professors could wake up one day here in the next year or two and realize they don't have a job anymore, because the university is restructuring their program. And that is really terrifying and really sad. It's something that professors aren't used to dealing with. They would just so much assume that since their income really only comprises a quarter or maybe up to a third of the tuition cost, they would think that their salaries are pretty safe, because 2/3 or 3/4 of the tuition money that goes into a university goes to all the other costs. All the administration costs, the staff costs, the building costs, the cost of building new buildings, maintaining the old buildings. And wherever else that money goes, I don't even know. I just know that when I have students come up to me and talk about the millions of dollars I must be making, I try to emphasize to them, only 25 cents out of that dollar that you give the university goes to me. And really, that doesn't scale up very well. I mean, that accounts for the minimum number of students, but certainly not anything beyond that. Here at Ivy Tech, I think I've heard the most bare minimum number of students to run a class is 8. Okay. And when you pay, I don't know, maybe $500 for a course, okay, you consider, well, maybe a quarter of that is going to me, so $125 of that is going to me, maybe. And yeah, multiply that by 8 students, that gets pretty close to what I'm getting paid. Pretty close. It's actually kind of sad, to be honest. So it's really not that big of a deal when you look at it from that perspective to try to cut faculty, because faculty really don't comprise most of the cost. Most of the cost is everything else that the university is doing. Okay. And one of the other frustrating things that was kind of brought up during this discussion is seeing some of the other projects that the university wants to invest in, wants to put money towards through this USAP report. To try to bring more students into the university, they want to go around and make it more beautiful. So all these costs that they're wanting to cut by restructuring these programs, they're putting that money and then some into planting trees, into flowers, into maybe works of art, or fountains or something. And I don't know, when I walk around IPFW campus, I think it looks nice already. I honestly don't think it looks trashy. And so I don't know where in the report they did this study that surveyed a bunch of students that were like, hey, would you be more apt to come to IPFW if we had a 50-foot water fountain with mastodon crystals in the middle of it, because mastodon is the mascot for IPFW. Would you be more apt to come to campus? Okay, I mean, I guess I could see that. I mean, I would certainly be more apt to come to campus if you had color-changing LED lights down each one of the sidewalks. That were kind of set up like a Michael Jackson music video, to where you step on them and they light up. I think that'd be pretty cool. Does that mean that that's a great idea for university to do that? To spend millions of dollars on that? I can't justify that. I don't really think that'll bring in too many more students. And the other side of the coin, do you think it would help you stay at the university, crack down on the books, and graduate if you had a few more trees outside of your dorm room? I don't really think that is a huge, significant factor in that. But once again, I haven't done that survey and I haven't looked at the results of such surveys, so I honestly can't tell. But I guess it's just, I would think that a bigger drawer for students would be having the programs that they want to go to school for, as opposed to having a campus that's exuberant to look at. Because I think IPFW campus is already pretty to look at. I do. I walk through it all the time. On my way to Old Crown on the weekends, or when I'm on my way to Ivy Tech sometimes, I'll go ahead and walk on nicer days. And so I'm very familiar with walking through campus. It's a nice looking campus. So I don't I don't really see a further need for beautification when you're considering, planting 100 trees or firing 30 professors. I'm not seeing that as really being a viable trade-off. That just seems ridiculous to me. But once again, I don't know. Wasn't on the USAP committee myself, so I clearly can't tell you a whole lot from that. But this history professor, he did a very nice job. He really broke down a number of these different concerns and tried to lay out kind of a structure for, well, there is hope. There is hope from this point forward because of the fact that this is set up in multiple stages and in multiple steps to where they're going to do a number of different things and approach things in a variety of ways. And the restructure step, the one that's really freaking everybody out, is the one that's kind of on the reconsideration block right now. So the restructuring is being reconsidered, which is promising. Okay, so those people might not lose their jobs, but then again, they might decide to just go ahead and go through with it and just go ahead and follow through with the worst possible case scenario and just dump all those programs, dump all those professors, dump all those students, and say, you know what, that's good enough, whatever. Good luck. But luckily, after talking with people, namely the history professor, once he got to the question and answer session of his lecture, people were able to ask him some of these very difficult questions. And he clarified that if indeed that worst case scenario did happen and everything just got dissolved out, that the university would go ahead and extend faculty stays. They would extend the programs, at least to allow the currently admitted students to finish in those programs. But then, once that 4-year period was up, then those programs would diminish, be absorbed into other programs or whatever, and many of those faculty would probably lose their jobs. So even in worst case scenario, we probably have a 4-year lease on continuing life more or less as we see it now. Now obviously there would be other things that would go ahead and undergo the restructure process. They would probably try and repurpose some of the classrooms, lab rooms, maybe some of the materials, maybe some of the research materials even, and definitely cut down on the funding that's coming into the research programs. So the research programs themselves may suffer from stagnation in that time. Like I was saying before, with the great stuff that they're doing with robotics and AI, I mean, if all of a sudden they can't get more funds and to get new parts or new technologies or software or whatever, my gosh, that great research is just going to sit there on a desk for 4 years until the professor can go elsewhere, take everything with him, and go someplace that's actually going to allow him to get some funding and continue his work. I hate that. That's so aggravating. So aggravating. I mean, it was aggravating for me being a master's student and seeing how inhibited various parts of my research were just based on materials and costs. I couldn't keep a steady supply of lizards for my baby rattlesnakes when I was trying to feed them different diets. I couldn't get a steady supply. It was crazy. It was hard to get the money as it was, but it was even harder just to get the supply of the lizards. It's a real tough process. And so I know and I understand how difficult it can be to finish and work on a research project when you don't have the funds or you don't have the resources to do that. It's so infuriating. So, who knows? Maybe that'll become the fate of these programs. And maybe not. Maybe the university will actually be able to sit down and maybe try to give it another year or two to try to collect some more specific data. Maybe they will start doing some program level metrics that actually have meaning to them. Actually look at programs and try to sit down and calculate, okay, this is how much money the university is giving to the program, this is how much money the program itself is bringing in through all of its professors, through all the research, and then try to look at, well, how many students go into the program, how many students graduate from the program, and then maybe even look at what happens to those students. Do they go on to immediately get a job in that field? Do those physics students go on to get a job in physics? Or do they go on to a related field like engineering? Or do they just go back to working at Lowe's, only they just start doing Lowe's full time and can't get a physics job until five years later when one opens up that they're interested in? I mean, these surveys and these metrics need to take into account all these different factors in order to really give us the best data possible so we can evaluate what's happening with these students. So we can make these giant, large-scale decisions on a college level to best serve the college itself as well as the students, the faculty, and the staff. And it's just we're going to need more specific metrics to be able to do that. Because otherwise, just looking at raw numbers is stupid, ridiculous. I don't even know who looks at raw numbers anymore. I mean, on a related topic, you can look at raw numbers of gun deaths every year. That's fine, but it's still decreasing every single year. Every single year, gun deaths are decreasing. Used to be like 16,000 a year. Now it's down to 12,000 a year. Even though if you look at the population just keeps going up. Because that's what humans do. They constantly increase in population. So when we see the raw numbers go down, we know that the percentages, which calculate, an actual rate, so to speak, let's say numbers of gun homicides per 100,000 people, even those rates are going down. And they're going down fast because the raw numbers keep going down and the population keeps going up. So you're having an increasing gap between the two, which means a changing percentage rate in the rates of gun deaths. And so we have to try to keep absolute numbers and the rates or percentages in context and in mind when making these decisions. Because when looking at raw numbers, yes, nursing program needs to get more funding than the physics program. Absolutely, just based on raw numbers. But if we look at the effectiveness or efficiency of each program to graduate its members, or to graduate its students, that's when you start to think, well, physics is much more efficient. So why would we want to cut that funding? How about we just try to maybe throw more funding at nursing, or maybe try to reconsider what we're doing there, maybe try to implement some new study methods, some more inspirational tools, implement more tutoring availability for those students or something, just to try to retain those students so they can graduate and become productive members of society as nurses. That would be great. But one of the things I just got an email about, actually, just going on a little bit of a tangent here, was this kind of buddy system that Harvard, I guess, is trying to implement here in this state at least. I'm sure they're trying to do it in other states too. To try to almost have like a study buddy, okay, where you have a network of study buddies that you can call upon if you need help studying a particular topic. Okay, so let's say you have Uncle Joe, or sorry, I shouldn't use that. Uncle Bob, all right? Say Uncle Bob, who is great at math, and you're not so great at math. So Uncle Bob should be your study buddy for whenever you have a math-related question, or if you're having problems with math, you should just go to Uncle Bob, because he's in the family, he's available, he lives just down the road, whatever. Boom, use Uncle Bob. And so I think part of this initiative is trying to get you to realize the resources you have at your fingertips, whether they be family members or maybe friends, maybe high school classmates or whatever, and try to utilize those resources that are right there next to you that can help you succeed in your program. And of course it takes Harvard to figure this out, because that's not a completely obvious thing that everybody should be doing anyway, but I don't know, from a lot of things I see out of Harvard, they seem to excel at pointing out the common sense things that we should already be doing anyway. Just kind of outstanding to me. But it's just me being mildly entertained very easily. But no, so that's kind of one of the things that people are trying to do to try to increase student retention and student graduation rate. And so maybe that would help with maybe the nursing program. Maybe they can try to implement this study buddy system to try to give people some semblance of, hey, using the buddy system, here's a friend to help you out. You're not alone on this. Because a lot of students, they start going through some of this material that's very in-depth and that's very complicated, and they start getting overwhelmed. And it absorbs them in fear. And so we start seeing this effect where students start giving up. They just can't take it. Can't take the pressure, can't take the stress, so they end up dropping out of class, they stop going to class, and then they fail out. And they end up going to work at McDonald's and leading an unfulfilling life for the most part, because they tried to do something and they failed. So clearly they weren't meant to do that. And in some cases that's definitely true. Okay, not everybody was meant to be a nurse by any means. But sometimes it does require just a little bit of extra help to get some students to succeed in the areas that they want to succeed, and that they can certainly succeed at. It's just sometimes they get presented with too many hurdles and they can't handle it. And so some of the study buddy system is trying to alleviate some of that stress, some of that pressure, especially since you're interacting with intimate people that you know very well, because they're your friends, they're your family, things of that nature. And that's great. I love seeing that. I love seeing somebody actually taking an initiative to help increase student retention and graduation rates, because that's a problem right now. I mean, even at a place like Ivy Tech, we are seeing student graduation. Excuse me. We are seeing student graduation rates fall, because we're having so many students come into the system that a lot of them probably shouldn't be there. But then even more of them aren't prepared to be there. And so they get overwhelmed and they're like, oh my gosh, college is just too much for me. I can't do it. And so they quit. And if there's a way that we can help, give them some help along the way by helping them realize that they can come to friends and family to help them, then we might be able to increase morale, so to speak, among the students and get them to stick with it, through to the end. And that's great. That's what I love to see. I love to see initiatives like that try to take that kind of perspective to help the needy, so to speak. But anyway, going back to this whole USAP thing, very interesting. when you look at it, I still have yet to look up the exact data points that they have collected. Try to piece out some of that myself and try to see what they plan on doing. Because right now, I mean, really, this whole USAP thing is part of a plan to achieve a desired state by 2020. Alright, so they've gone through a year of basically data collection, and then they're going through a year now of trying to implement some of these changes. Trying to restructure the university and what it does and how it operates. And so we're looking to go forward from here, trying to meet all these different metrics that they want to achieve by 2020. I believe Dr. Mallinson said that there was about 91 different objectives that they're trying to meet, and that their proposal that they're on right now achieves 40% of those objectives. So we still have another 60% to even propose to reach the intended endpoint in 4 years' time. Okay, so there's a lot of work yet to be done. Definitely a lot more input that needs to come from the community on this. A lot more data and understanding that needs to be shared among people for this, because a lot of people are getting a bad feeling about this whole thing, thinking that it's maybe a political maneuver that is more based on feeling than it is on data. Because when we go look at the data, once again, the data is at the department level. So how can we be making program level decisions from department level data? That doesn't make any sense. It feels and smells like politics, and it's really off-putting to a lot of people, including myself. And once again, when we see where the money is proposing to be redirected, we see it being redirected towards nursing and engineering, which are important. They're certainly probably two of the most important industries up here in Northeast Indiana, but you can't forget about everything else in favor of those two things. I mean, and as some of the students even commented at the lecture, we're already being oversaturated with some of these fields here in Northeast Indiana. So there are actually a number of these graduates that aren't able to get jobs here. They have to go elsewhere, because we are already oversaturated with nurses up here, already oversaturated with engineers up here. So why funnel more money into these programs if we're just going to produce more graduates that have to leave the town? I don't know. So very complex situation, very interesting. Be sure to look up, if you're interested, go ahead and look up any information you can online about it. You can find a number of different websites. Even on IPFW's website, they have some materials there that you can look up. Other than that, thank you for joining me on this Based on Facts episode. My name is Chris Rex, and have a great week.